2019 is the year of the mayoral and first selectman races in cities and towns across Connecticut, and some of them could be pretty hot this year. With us today to talk about that is our two great journalists from the Hartford Courant, Kevin Rennie and Rick Green. We thank you very much for being here again. And gentlemen, let's first of all begin with the Hartford mayoral race, because that was the big news this week. Mayor Luke Bronin announced that he was running for a second term. Your take on that?
Well, he certainly starts as a favorite, but it's not unusual when a mayor of a community seeks higher office, as he did last year, falls short in a campaign for governor, and then comes back home that they may have lost some support that they had previously enjoyed, because they've sort of expressed that they, in a very vivid way, that they're not that interested in the job, or they're looking for another job. And it encourages stronger challengers than they might otherwise have attracted.
Rick, do you agree this is why the challengers are coming out?
I think Kevin makes a good point. You have a mayor who knocked off a sitting mayor 4 years ago, won by a comfortable nearly 1,000 votes, I think. But his opponents are kind of provocative. We have the chairman of the school board and what looks like very likely a state representative going at him. And I wouldn't underestimate Bronin, however. He's a hard campaigner. He has a pretty good record to run on, even with his casting his eye on the governor's residence. So I think he's approaching this from a good position.
What do we know about the other potential candidates? There are some declared and some not.
One is the chairman of the Board of Education. He has tangled with Luke Bronin, so he has no...
Rick Stallings?
Yes, he is not. He has no reason to be intimidated by him. He has faced him down before. And Brandon McGee is a very resilient young Democrat who represents a district that is both Hartford and Windsor. He won a remarkable first term a few years ago when he had there were 2 recounts. He was tied. They'd have a second vote, and he won that. He, I think he comes with a lot of energy, and what voters in Hartford will ask themselves is, are we better off today than we were 4 years ago? And I don't know that the answer to that question is all that clear.
See, I would disagree. You can't deny that Hartford is not on the upswing. If you take a look back in the history of Hartford, go back 10 years, there's no doubt that Hartford is doing better now. Are the neighborhoods sharing with the benefits of all the apartments downtown, UConn campus, stadium? That's worth debating. But
I think that's, the Democratic primary voters are not downtown.
Exactly.
They're in other neighborhoods.
Yeah. Well, there are some who will tell you, too, that the prices of houses have dropped dramatically and they're not selling like they are in the suburbs. And so there are some people who say that Hartford isn't going in the right direction. They would argue that.
Right.
The Hartford Democratic politics is very fractured, and really they fight vigorously.
I'd say the more people that are in this race, the better it is for Luke Bronin.
Speaking of fractured, Eddie Perez, if he throws his hat in the ring, the former mayor, what's the latest on that? I know you've had difficulty getting an answer from him.
We have difficulty getting an answer. I found it provocative that reporters that work for me at the Courant get emails from people who are close to Eddie that appear to be saying positive things about him. So I wouldn't be so sure that the former mayor isn't considering something. We've seen no evidence other than he's back on the scene.
There are a few other races that we're going to be keeping an eye on, of course. New Britain, Mayor Erin Stewart has not officially announced her plans. She's all expected to, to run, and she ran for governor and lieutenant governor briefly last year. How does that impact her fate over there?
Well, it makes you look vulnerable to ran for governor, pulled out at the last minute as the nominating convention was about to begin. Ran for lieutenant governor and lost pretty decisively in the primary, and so you look like maybe you're not the phenomenon that you were 4 years before. And in places like New Britain, there's a lot of energy among Democrats. I mean, not just New Britain, but across the state, there is a lot of Democratic energy because of Donald Trump, and so people may not be as willing. Loyal Democrats may not be as willing to vote for a Republican as they were a few years ago.
So a Democrat could do well there.
You have a Republican mayor there who has signaled very clearly that she wants to work with our new Democratic governor. I think that will broaden her appeal, her kind of already existing centrist appeal that she has.
Let's talk about Bridgeport and New Haven. Tony Harp, already challenger, has announced against her.
Yeah, I think she's in trouble. I just think there's been such a unbroken tale of misuse of local funds and odd things happening with people in her office and their connections and conflicts. And I just think that that if she only has one challenger, she's really going to have a tough time.
Joe Ganim, running for re-election. This would be his 4th term, actually, dating back to the previous terms that he held. And he's already being challenged by State Senator Marilyn Moore.
You know, in both of those cities, I've watched very carefully what happens in the General Assembly this year. I think you're going to see more assistance to both New Haven and Bridgeport from the Lamont administration compared to what we saw under Governor Malloy. So I think that both of those mayors are going to look a little better because they're going to be getting more from the state.
Does Ganim's run for governor hurt him in Bridgeport, do you think?
I think it does, and I think it's the same sort of the same principle. He, you know, he only won one municipality in that race against Ned Lamont last summer, and that was Bridgeport, and he got about 57% of the vote, and that I think is one reason why he's drawn a legitimate, strong challenger.
We saw some in this past year, a lot of state lawmakers who were Republicans lost in Republican towns, and they all blamed Donald Trump. Could the same thing happen with first selectmen running in some of these Republican towns? Could Greenwich, perhaps, Darien, could some of these other places, Simsbury, could they go Democrat?
Well, we saw, what was it, New Canaan, I think, where, you know, does it get more Republican than New Canaan? And we saw how close that town council there came to flipping. So, yeah, that's possible, especially since there's a lot of energy down in the lower portion of Fairfield County, Democratic energy.
Are there any Republican towns that you know of, Kevin, that have really are so anti-Trump right now that it really could hurt who's ever in office?
Well, I think Greenwich is the primary example. They lost they have the first Democratic state senator in 80 years, and it was a close race for first selectman in 2017. And the Greenwich Democrats spend a lot of money. Their candidates spend on their own hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that matters.
It's going to be a fascinating year. Kevin Rennie and Rick Green, we thank you so much for being in the program today.